Hi, everybody. We are back with another one of your questions about work. And I feel like this one is, we've got two guests this time, I should say. So for those of you who are here with us for the first time, I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. Lisa, who is from the UK, has a multicultural family whose prior experience working with us was in Berlin, where she ran Entrepreneur First's efforts there, has a lens on this question. So we've got, as we were talking in the prep session, we're like, wait, Lisa, just join us. And Laetitia, who's been on before, is an expert in work who has the Building Bridges podcast and writes at her newsletter, often with a feminist perspective on the future of work. And so I feel like we're gonna have many of these collaborations. So this is, the question for today is this, is if I've got a team that includes people who have different cultures. And I'm going to encourage us, despite the fact we have three white people talking to each other here, and so there are limitations in our lived experience, we do have different nationalities and genders, of course, and professional experiences, family experiences, all that. Let's think as broadly as possible about this, people from different regions within a country, people from different nations. And so how do I work with people from different cultures? And I guess where I'd love to just start is with asking you both about what your personal experiences have been with this. And Lisa, you were starting to tell us, so maybe just start with how you've experienced this, and then Laetitia will do you, and we'll try to synopsize somehow.
Yeah, I was just telling Roy and Laetitia behind the scenes that I've worked in London, I've worked in Paris, and I've worked in Berlin. And one of the funniest parts is when it comes to summer, because summer in America, no one switches off. Everyone is always online. It's on Slack, it's on email. Even if you take a couple of days off, fully switching off seems almost impossible. If you try and get someone in Paris to do something in August, no one will respond. I did an internship in Paris when I think I was 21, and they were like, yeah, your working hours are between 12 and 3, and you get an hour-long lunch. And so I was kind of confused because I was like, I'm not really working at all. And then in Berlin, I mean, one of the most interesting parts of working in Berlin was that people really didn't kind of communicate their professional identity outside of work. And so I once went to a party and I asked someone, what do you do? And they said, we don't ask those questions here. And I think that's so interesting because when I moved to America, I found that everyone's sort of associated with their professional identity. And so just having these experiences was really interesting for me, just how people—
I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
It was very unusual. And just to this question, I think it just requires a lot of effort to understand.
Well, hold on, I'm gonna stop you for a second because I want to get to how to do it in a second, but I just want to get some stories on the table. So Laetitia, can you share what some of your experiences have been around this? I mean, you're involved in several cross-national efforts, and you moved yourself from the UK. Yeah. Anyway, so tell us a little bit about how you've experienced
I was born
this.
into a multicultural family, all white European, but German mother and French father, and there are huge cultural differences between the two, between the French and the Germans. And then I moved to the UK and worked for an American company. So I worked with Americans. On the subject of work, there was this huge gap that Lisa described about holidays and work-life balance and things like that. That's a huge difference. But just understanding others, I have a part of my family that's German, and I'm more French than German. So today I live in Germany. I find that a lot of the things that I say are not fully understood by others because I tend to be ironic. That's a French thing. So irony basically means you say the opposite of what you actually mean, as a way of making it more subtle, or just basically criticizing something in a way that doesn't take itself too seriously. And with Americans or with Germans, it just doesn't work. They will just not understand the message. So the
German television set does not have an antenna that tunes into the irony channel.
Absolutely not. And the Americans don't either. Yeah, but it's true. Sure. It's true. This way of imitating someone you disagree with imitating a fascist or something like that. That's typically what the French person will say to criticize a position that they disagree with. But if you do that with Germans or Americans, they will basically think you're one of
our
them.
Commenters on
that just
Periscope
doesn't
is
work.
agreeing. Yeah, and I'll just say for me, so I experience all those, and I'm son of immigrants in the U.S. and I've lived in different places around the U.S. And I experienced that it doesn't matter what level you're looking at in terms of how big the cultural catchment area is, and I'll describe what I mean in a second. You can always split it up. So I grew up on 68th and Columbus, and I'm so different from somebody who grew up on 68th and York. It's just, an entirely different thing. And even within the US, Lisa, to your point about how Americans tend to ask about where you work, when I moved from New York to California, and as I got older, I discovered that, older people tended to ask me less often. And in California, much less often. Like in DC, I was just there a couple of weeks ago. It's like within the first 45 seconds kind of a question. And the new Californian is like, hey, buddy, we don't, even though it's public on the internet, I don't want to tell you where I work, kind of a thing. So my point is just that you can split the differences kind of as narrowly as you want or as broadly. And of course, standard disclaimer, the differences between individuals are always going to be much greater than the differences between cultures on average, nonetheless. But Lisa, I interrupted you sharing with some of your thoughts on how people might go about addressing this. So would love to hear, okay, any team, you have people of different cultures. They may be different national cultures, they may be different neighborhood cultures, whatever, but some difference always exists. And so would love to hear how you think about what one does about that.
So funny, Roy, to your point, I feel like I'm always learning about American nuances from East Coast to West Coast. I feel like East Coasters move at such a fast pace. West Coasters pretend to be chill, but they're actually not very chill. And so I think to answer this question, it just requires a really sustained effort because it's not easy. Everyone comes into this world looking at it in a different way. And especially if you come from a different country, it just requires asking questions, patience, picking up on nuances. And I know this is kind of not a clear-cut answer, but
I think, sorry, I didn't finish your thought.
No, it's just it's taken me a long time to recognize the differences between working in Germany and working in America, and I'm still learning. So that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, look, I do think the answer to 99% of work problems is the second you've identified the problem, what's the answer? Try to solve the problem, and then it's just about figuring it out. But there is a way, and Laetitia, we were talking about this earlier, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. There's a way in which I think cultural differences are like the weather, where it's you can't do anything about the fact that a bunch of French people won't work in August, or that when I moved to California, my CMO would go surfing every day, and for 2 hours, he literally wouldn't answer things because he was surfing, and I was like, what the that's like the weather in the sense that how do you deal with that? Well, you put on a raincoat, you go outside, it takes effort. But then there's a way in which cultural differences are different than the weather in that the weather is obvious to us. We can see it. That French people are taking off all of August. You may be initially surprised by it, but after the initial surprise, there's not much to do. And Laetitia, I'd love to hear, you were just talking about some of the nuances of what to do when it may be less apparent. And I'd just love to hear any reflections on that.
First, I'd like to respond to that thing you said
Please.
About San Franciscans being very different from New Yorkers and saying, oh, but you're from the South, right? That's right. So
Parisians
different.
From somebody from
right,
Lyon.
Exactly. That's perfectly true. And yet, when you're in Thailand together, or when someone from China sees you, they say, oh, you're American. You're both really American. So you do have something that really, really reflects some kind of culture that we have in common, in spite of all the problems and fractures and divisions.
And by the way, when the aliens arrive, they're going to be like these fucking Earthlings. They're all so similar.
Exactly. They're all the same. They're all the same. 2 legs, 2 arms. Yeah, exactly. No, what we were referring to earlier before is this context scale that was so well described in the book by Erin Meyer called the culture map. So you have on one end of the exactly. So on one end of the scale, you have low context cultures in which you do not need to understand to know the context to understand the message. And Americans are known to be quite low context because they value being explicit. They value recaps and being as clear as possible. You keep asking that question, does that make any sense? Do I make myself clear? Which French people or German people would not even ask, because, it's just the responsibility for the understanding of the message does not lie with the person emitting it. So that's great for Americans. They incorporated so many different cultures over the decades with different immigrants from different cultures. And so they adopted two things: this lowest common denominator, which is low context, otherwise there's no way we can understand each other, and smiling. So Americans smile a lot more than a lot of other countries. Okay, some Asian cultures do smile a lot, but Americans. And they're also super enthusiastic about everything, or pretend to be anyway. They're always excited, right, about everything. So the great thing when you're in a team, and an American manager will find that easy to make himself or herself understood by others in the team. And that's a super way to start communication, improve communication. Where Americans will need to improve is understanding that a lot of other cultures need context you need the context to understand the message. So there was this example of irony with the French, but there are examples of, the Chinese with saving face and, all sorts of layers of politeness in different cultures, and you will just completely miss it. And the only way to learn it is to know a little bit about the country, the culture, its history. And it takes time, but it takes curiosity. Without it, there's no way you will understand that subtlety.
To me, the version of what Lisa was saying, an effort, is that the effort to seek to try to understand. And look, these things get complicated. I remember the first time I went to Japan, I studied all these things about like business cards and how they do it. And you sit in a meeting in the precise order of seniority. And then I showed up and it was like the first or second meeting, and I was with this high level corporate delegation, whatever. And the guy on the other side was like, "Roy, you're sitting in the wrong chair." And I was like, "Oh my God." And he's like, "No, I'm just messing with you." And he was Americanized enough that he knew that I would be worried about that, meaning he was exposed enough to American culture that he knew the specific things that an American visiting Japan for the first time would be worried about. And he played with it, and it was wonderful. We made it's like a very human moment. But man, this stuff is endlessly hard. And I do think that in curiosity, I hear, Laetitia, what I hear you saying is respect, is really just seeking to, I think when we get into problems is when people start putting one culture or another on a higher or lower plane in terms of its effectiveness. And at the same time, this is the paradox of work, is not all styles are created equal. Some do work better than others in general. Some work better than others under certain circumstances. And there's this push-pull between universal respect and like, look, I know you think it's just part of your culture to take 10 minutes to get to the point, but I need you to get to the fucking point. And so, that's the push-pull that happens. And, there's no absolute answer to it. The second you get into absolutes is when,
That's a great example of get to the fucking point, right? That's a great example because it comes to the cultural differences when it comes to persuading others. And persuasion, there's a huge difference. There's the principles first cultures and the applications first culture. And you are application first. So you need to,
Americans,
what's the
or
point?
Do you mean me?
Americans. You Americans. Sorry, Lisa, you're not exactly included, but you're in America now, so probably you're influenced by that principles. Application first. So
the U.S. government,
stories.
She's not eligible to be American, so we're good.
Excellent. So you'll be one of them soon. So your applications first. But British people are applications first too, compared to the French and the Germans. The French and Germans are the same. They need the theory first. So you have these 10 minutes of theory, because otherwise they will not be persuaded. Just one example or just one actionable thing, they will not be convinced by it. They will even rebel. They will not want it. They say, why?
I'm remembering how I struggled to learn Australian business culture because I used to work for News Corp. And Australian business culture is similar to that, only they like to start with the process. A lot of things are very process driven. What process will we use? Process and beer, I learned, were the two things if you want to start
like
an
the
Australian
Germans.
Which is, totally fine. It all works, it all works. All right. Well, I feel like we could talk about this subject forever, but I think we've given people some useful insights about how to apply effort, how to understand the context. how to do the push-pull between respect and effectiveness. So that's our not advice for today. And if you made it to this point in listening, it's not advice because we literally don't have a prescription for you. We're just trying to give you our examples so you live your life. And if folks have other questions, I got a great one yesterday on LinkedIn. Somebody hit me up. And we do draw these questions from your comments, so please do comment, and then let's link to this book in the thread, because I think this sounds like The Culture Map is a great book. I remember, Laetitia, it was on your list of a dozen books or whatever about the future of work, which was great. All right, to be continued, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.